In this video, I'm going to talk about one of the most important functional movement patterns we train in the gym, the squat. I'm going to talk about what goes into good squatting, why good squatting can sometimes be so difficult, and proper cueing, breathing, and bracing in a squat, as well as some variations and why we do them. Okay, that's a lot to cover. Let's start with a basic body weight squat. In a standard squat, your feet are shoulder width apart, and that's defined by a vertical line that comes directly up from the middle, the inside of your feet to your armpit creases. Then your toes should be only slightly outturned. Some people will need to turn out a little more than others based on some of their individual anatomy of the hip joint. But generally speaking, the guideline is about 5 to 10 degrees of outturn. And of course, the feet should be symmetrically outturned. Then you want to be tall through the crown of your head, shoulders down and back, proud chest. And then I want you to activate your feet and your core. And part of the core that I like to talk about is the lumbopelvic area. This is the area that kind of stabilizes this section. And that's important in a squat throughout. What you're going to do is basically act like you're screwing your feet into the ground by applying sort of an outward torque force through the feet into the ground. And this, your feet aren't moving, to be clear. You're just kind of screwing them in or turning outward. And you'll feel a couple things, or you should. One is in your hips. Things turn on in your glutes. And these are the deep hip rotators and your glute medius that are really fired up to be ready to stabilize this area as you descend and ascend from the squat. The other area that activates is your feet. You should feel that they really kind of grip the ground a little more. You want to spread out those toes, the long arch on the inside, maybe lift it a bit. This is all very good. This is an active foot. That's where you draw stability from. The next thing you'll notice is that the kneecaps may have turned out, which is great because you want the middle of the kneecap to stay tracking over the second toe throughout the squat. A common form fault is having the knees collapse inward because that activation and stability from the feet and the pelvis are not present. So the more you focus on that, the better you'll guide your legs in position. Okay, now breathing, and you're going to breathe in at the top, and you can either hold as you descend or you can take that breath in as you go down into a squat as deeply as you can while keeping your feet flat on the ground. And then you're going to press up and exhale forcefully. You can do so out of pursed lips. This improves bracing, and the effort of the lift will, feel better. So you're going to keep your heels on the ground because you really want to feel like you're pressing through the entire foot, very much through the heel as well. This will help you feel your glutes more in the squat. Okay, where do things go wrong? Why don't I start with where you can hold weight? If you're progressing past a body weight squat, you can hold a weight against your chest like this, and it's really just resting here. And I'm holding it like this. You can hold it like this. You can hold it like so. You can even use a kettlebell. But the bottom line is it's against your body, and you have to be more conscious of that upper back activation. So you want to stay engaged through your shoulder blades here, retract them, stay open here. If your upper body rounds throughout any part of the squat, the rest of your spine will be out of neutral position, and it's not in a safe position. So you really want to stay really engaged through your upper back as you descend and come back up, okay? Now, that's a goblet squat. It's a great entry-level squat. Now, where do things go wrong? Two places. One, squat depth is not quite very deep, and you feel stuck here. That can be related to tight hips or tight ankles. We need good mobility in both of those areas to squat well. If your hips are really locked up or you're quite weak through your back, your posterior chain, what tends to happen is you'll collapse very much forward as you go down, or you'll come down, and to go up, you end up sort of leading with your bum and your torso is forward. You want to try and aim for, at the bottom of the squat, to have your torso angle match the angle of your shin bone. So in many cases, the torso will be more parallel to the ground than it should be, okay? And if in that case, you need to work a little bit of your hip mobility. Hip mobility relies on equal length tension relationships or balanced length tension relationships between all the muscles attaching around the pelvis and femur. And so really it's going to come down to following a well-rounded training program that focuses on a lot of hip extension movements like glute bridges and Romanian deadlifts and, things that strengthen your back extensions, and even the upper back, the rows. They're all going to help you maintain a bit of a strength through the back body. And you probably need to work on loosening those hip flexors, okay? So in another video, I'll go through my recommendation for how to deal with tension in the hip flexors. But that just gives you an idea where to pay attention. Now, the other area that gets a little bit problematic are those ankles. And if you get stuck here, but going lower means you lift your heels, it's likely that your ankles are tight, or it's a combination of both, which is most often the case. So workaround is to elevate your heels on a slight incline. So with these rubber wedges that you can get at most fitness equipment stores, you can elevate your heels and eliminate some of the demand for for ankle flexion at the bottom. And you can get lower much more easily. Now you don't necessarily need these. You can use a 2x4 piece of wood. You can even use one of these bigger weight plates and simply have your heels on them to do a heels elevated squat. That will often work, and in another video I can talk or speak to my favorite ways to improve ankle mobility. Now, the final topic I want to discuss in this video briefly is, why do we squat differently? Why not always just squat the same way? There are a billion squat variations. One of the most important variations is a single leg squat. And the entry level version of that is a split squat, which is different than a lunge, which involves a stepping either back or forward. In a split squat, your feet are not moving, but the foot position is asymmetric. Compared with all the squats that have your feet symmetrically positioned, a split squat will have an asymmetric stance, and the load is mostly applied to one leg over the other. If you're doing a complete single leg squat, okay, such as a pistol squat or something of this nature, then obviously it's a full load on one leg. But the entry level variation of this would be a split squat. And in this case, all the same cues, or many of the same cues, apply as for squatting. The difference is you really want to feel anchored through that front foot. You want a nice wide stance, tall, retract the shoulder blades, breathe in, and come into a fully flexed position of the front leg. I don't care for this up-down kind of movement simply because you're not getting into a fully flexed position for that working leg. And you'll remember, if you're squatting like so, you're fully flexed through the ankles, knees, and hips in both legs. So the analogous movement would have you flexed at the ankle, knee, and hip on the working leg, the front leg. Meanwhile, if the back leg is extended at the hip, as mine is, you're getting a nice stretch of that hip flexor. And honestly, over time, doing good quality split squats will transfer to better squats. So a good program will always have you doing a single leg version, some sort of version of this split squat for some time to help rehabilitate your squat and improve the balance and the strength between your two legs. I have a video that goes through this split squat in a lot more detail, but remember, you want to be well anchored through that front foot. You want to activate the foot and guide the kneecap such that it's over the middle of that toe as you come down and forward. And then you want to press up and back. So it's not down and up, nor is it down and then up from there. It's actually down and forward and up and back. Your hips should stay level, I should say your pelvis, and forward facing. So watch that back leg, because if it's turned out, the pelvis goes with. You want to turn and place your feet as though they're in train tracks. Now, that is a challenging movement. If you put your front foot on a step, okay, I don't have one available in this video, but you can imagine that if your front foot is on a step, you don't need to travel as far down to get into that low position. So I'll often give that front foot elevated split squat as an entry level to the split squat because it encourages good mobility. Always work at your own level and don't go down further than you can control the movement. If you need to stabilize beside you with hand against wall or a stick in the opposite hand, that's also useful as you develop strength and stability in this movement. There's a lot more going on in split squat. It focuses a lot more on some of the pelvic stabilizers. That glute medius is really working. So is the inner thigh muscle, much more so than in a standard squat. So it's a real complement to your squat to do these. Now, I'm going to finish by saying that there are infinite variations of both of these, split squats and squats. For squats, you can vary the width of your stance. Okay, you'll see things like a cyclist squat, which you can do on an inclined board like this one, okay? Or a plywood applied, like resting on a brick or, another piece of wood or a yoga block at home. But the idea here is that by placing you up on an incline, the weight distribution emphasizes a much stronger, so your knee flexion is greater, and the effect is to put the emphasis on your quads much more than your glutes and your posterior chain here, okay? So simply putting your feet up can change the relative activation of the front versus the back, and also medial versus lateral quad. If you spread your stance, you'll tend to recruit more of the outer quad and your glutes. You'll feel them a lot more than if you squat narrow, where you're relatively recruiting a little more of the inner quad, perhaps less glute. And then of course there's different ways to hold weight, which will change the activation of the muscles of the body as you squat. So we already spoke about the front-loaded goblet squat. You can front load with a barbell, which is very demanding on the upper back, but also has the effect of working the quads relatively more than the glutes. And a back squat, which by virtue of where you're holding the weight with the barbell, will emphasize a little bit more the posterior chain. Okay, so we've got a lot of squat variations, and the more you do over time, the better squat mechanics you have, and the more even the length tension relationships of all these muscles that attach in and around your hip are, and you'll move better with better joint mobility and strength throughout the range of motion. So it's important to do squat variations. Similarly, there are endless variations of single leg squats, front foot elevated, split squats, front foot elevated, flat feet, rear foot elevated, Bulgarian split squats, and fundamentally you can even do variations of body weight. Single leg squats, TRX, single leg squat progressions exist as well. The list is long and they're all useful because they all develop your strength in subtly different but complementary ways. So embrace the squat, and if you need to do some work on your hips and ankles, you can search for my hip mobility and ankle mobility videos.